What's going on, Dragons? Happy Friday. As always, I'm your co-host, Corey, and welcome to episode 36 of the ErCast, your weekly Friday Night Magic pre-show. Joining me in the Dragon's Den this week, as always, the one, the only, the sparkling vision of what a pro Magic player, who's not really a pro Magic player, should be, Cole.
The diamond of the season. Yes. How's it going, Corey?
Apparently not as good as you, because I'm not even a lump of coal this season. You're straight diamond, huh?
Well, it's ironic because my name is Cole, so you'd figure I'd be quite a lump myself. But
I often look at you and I go, man, if there is not a hunk of carbon that I've ever seen, there he is.
You give me a really tight hug and I start sparkling. That's for sure.
I take it you've been catching up on Bridgerton?
Yeah, well, I'm fully caught up on Bridgerton. That's not and I have been fully caught up for quite a while. If you're listening to this on the day of its release, the Bridgerton Season 3 Part 2 release coincided very closely with Flag Day, and we had a bit of a shindig, a Flag Day celebration focused on Bridgerton, and Corey was there. He knows the truth.
I want it on record. This is a true statement, by the way, but for unrelated reasons. I did attend. I heard a few facts about flags, and then I promptly left early. I was the first person out of that place.
I think he's actually gone before Bridgerton even came on the screen, but it was a fun time regardless.
Yeah, it was fun. I did feel a bit underdressed because, as I walk into the lovely abode that is your home, everyone is dressed in Bridgerton-esque garb, and I'm in cargo shorts and a t-shirt. I feel like there should have been a warning of decorum.
Well, and I'd like to be clear, there was a warning of decorum. In the initial invite, it said semi-Victorian garb was allowed / encouraged. And so you choosing to wear a Kirby's Air Ride vintage t-shirt was very well against the provided infographic.
I disagree. You said it was a vintage t-shirt, as in Victorian vintage.
Well, it was the talk of the night, that's for sure.
That sounds about right. So to this week's topic, similar in theme to how Bridgerton completely steals from Victorian era garb.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's a great segue already.
It's an interesting segue.
We're going to be talking about the icky, the sticky, the dirty maneuvers that is theft in Magic the Gathering. See how smooth that was? We went right from Victorian era garb in Kirby shirts. Hot Topic exclusive, by the way. I don't know where I got the shirt from. Right into to theft decks.
That is very smooth, and I think nobody saw that coming, but I think everybody is glad that the segue is now over. So
I think, and you can't hear it because it's just you and I recording, but if you listen closely on release day, I'm pretty sure you can hear the sounds of applause at the end of my segue. Not necessarily because it's over, but because of how beautiful it was.
More like you added it in afterwards in post.
Oh, that's a good idea. Hey, write that down. Write that editor's note down. So when I go into edit this, I put like a laugh track and just a raucous round of applause.
We'll get the ErCast howl recorded on there too, as that'd be convenient to have on a button.
All right.
Yeah, so theft.
We're like in deep here.
Theft in Magic. This is kind of like a hot topic because I think theft is one of the people don't like land destruction. People don't like stacks. People do not like getting their things stolen to some extent. I think there's different levels of thievery, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, and talk about how you can incorporate more theft in your decks, and if that's something that you're looking for, the pros and the cons of doing something like that. So I'm excited because I personally love playing a very unique game, so theft always provides that for me. So I'm definitely pro what's a good like term for petty theft?
Larceny. Pro larceny.
Yeah,
got it.
Larceny.
But you're like misdemeanor larceny, right? Like you said, petty theft. You're not like a grand larceny.
No, this is more shoplifting, less tax
Less,
evasion.
G- less
Or
GTA.
maybe it's tax evasion and shoplifting, but on a you know middle class scale, let's say.
Yeah, real like half blue, half white collar kind of area where you're landing.
Yeah. No foreign accounts.
I do like though the point you brought up. So when it comes to theft decks, I gotta give it to them for the fact that if you're looking for every single game to be different, that's what a theft deck provides for you, right? Like you're trading off, I think, consistency. I would argue because in any other strategy, you go, okay, I got my 99, and here's how I set up my engine, and blah blah
And you
blah. And
can
here's my
rely
win
on
cons.
having those cards every single game in your deck
Yeah.
somewhere.
Whereas on a theft deck, I mean, it's you're playing a deck to play the other 300 cards sitting at the table.
Well, actually, it's only 396 because of the commanders.
I steal those too.
No, yeah, that's 100% right. You're kind of, oh, and I think one of the greatest positives to that is that it can really feel like you're scaling your power level of your deck to the table that you're playing with. Because if opponents are playing really strong creatures, you're going to be able to steal or, reanimate or otherwise take those creatures from your opponents and flip them back on them. If you're playing a theft deck, depending on what you're trying to steal, and you're up against 3 spell slingers or decks that just don't have a lot of creatures, and say you're trying to steal creatures, you're going to be playing a little bit of a different game, maybe not a ideal matchup for you. But the point is that theft is a very unique concept in Magic because it literally makes every game you play unique.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point when you talk about spell slinger decks versus say creature heavy decks, stuff like that, enchantment heavy decks. Because I would almost say that if you're in a theft deck, you want your opponents to be playing more like good stuff as opposed to maybe a spell slinger deck, because a spell slinger deck usually relies on having some kind of combo engine out. Like, oh, I cast a spell, it's going to trigger these magecraft abilities, it's going to ping you for 1 because I've got this, one thing out. Oh, I got to get my storm count up for gutter or for grape shot or something like that.
Sure.
So if you're stealing, most decks you're stealing one thing at a time, or you're stealing one thing from each opponent at a time. It might be hard for you to get that engine in place to really get the payoffs from a spell slinger deck. Whereas if you are in a creature heavy deck, you might sit there and be like, oh, I just got some big beater, whatever 8/8 trampling, like disgusting thing off their deck.
Yeah, and so I mean, it all depends on what you're trying to steal and what your game plan is as a theft deck. Because there's part of me thinks that even playing against a spell slinger, obviously they need that gutter snipe for their storm payoff. There's other ways for them to win the game, but being able to take somebody else's creature that is integral to their game plan, it becomes like a form of disruption. And so I think even in those kind of poor matchups, you are provided with opportunities to still impact the game, even if you're not stealing like a Craterhoof Behemoth and winning through combat. Ideally, your theft deck should not rely entirely on theft, because sometimes your opponents just aren't going to have stuff to steal.
You know what's interesting?
Everything in the entire world. The world's a magical place, and it's filled with interesting things.
I will show you the way. Oh. No, like I just had this thought as you were describing it of.
Hold on, I got a knock on the door. Oh my God, it's Disney, the feds. It's the Pinkertons, but for Disney. This episode just got demonetized. They're making us pay.
Defrosted Walt. Walt's been defrosted as we speak. No, so you talked about how theft decks kind of operate in a disruption strategy.
Sure.
What would you think then if you were to describe a theft deck as like, hey, it's a cross between an aggro strategy and a stack strategy? Stacks in the sense that you're disrupting other people's play patterns without really impacting your own play pattern.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. You are disrupting other people's play patterns, but I guess it kind of depends on the type of theft and like if it's permanent or if it's one turn. A lot, like we haven't really defined, thievery. I think it's kind of pretty explanatory, but there are, 3, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much 3 ways that you're able to steal cards from somebody, and that's off of their board. It's from their hand, the top of the hand slash top of the library, like cards that aren't in play, and then stealing from the graveyard. And so I think if you are actively denying your opponent's resources by like ripping cards out of their hand, or maybe controlling the top of their library and or playing cards, bribery, which takes a creature from your opponent's library, you can then kind of claim that you're playing that like mix between aggro and stacks, more like an aggro control deck to some extent. But if you are taking pieces temporarily, or maybe I'm milling cards from your library into your graveyard and then reanimating from there, I don't really feel like you're impacting somebody's strategy enough. Like they could say, oh, you took my integral combo creature, but at the end of the day, that creature could have been the 99th card on the bottom of your deck, and you're never going to see it throughout the course of that entire game. So unless you're stealing people's pieces permanently or stealing things from your hand, I don't think it's that much of a like a resource denial,
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Now, I think the flip side to that is if they place something, let's say, directly in their graveyard. You talk about like, hey, if I steal or reanimate stuff out of other people's graveyard,
Yeah.
like if they, they're like, oh, I bury alive something,
and then you steal it out from their nose, then that is an edge case scenario. Yeah. And I think that's a great that's kind of a great center point to focus around, is like different ways of stealing provide different levels of salt. Like if you are, I play one of my favorite decks, I talk about it all the time, is my Scarab God deck, where I'm milling, and I often have enough good stuff in my own graveyard. I don't need to worry about other people's graveyards, but I'm trying to reanimate at instant speed creatures out of my opponent's graveyards. And often I've been matched up against another reanimator deck, and it kind of gets to this point where it's like, a standoff of like, I have open mana. If you put something in your graveyard, you are doing that with the knowledge that I can take it from you, in response. And so usually the graveyard, like, people are not as salty unless they're, kind of newer players. Like they see that one card they think they need, and they're like, oh, I haven't drawn a land and you've milled me, 4 lands. It's like, okay, cry me a river. But stealing from the board and stealing from the hand is definitely a lot saltier. And you kind of come into a game like that, like say you're playing Send Triplets, which on your turn you can choose an opponent and cast the cards out of their hand for their actual mana costs. No mana fixing there. But as soon as you do that, you kind of gain the general ire of everybody at the table. Like, oh, I don't want my stuff to be stolen. You guys don't want your stuff to be stolen. Let's focus down the thievery. Like there's no need for us to sit around here and have our stuff get stolen when we can all just blast this dude in the early turns of the game before he can get his theft engine online.
I think the way you look at it is, if we take theft out of the picture, right, and we look at it in 3 different strategies, it almost lines up with where I would argue most people feel the most salty about. So when you're talking top of deck, if we looked at it from a destruction standpoint, right, and it was no stealing, you're looking at like a mill strategy, which is taking stuff off the top of people's decks, a discard strategy, and let's say an edict or board wipe kind of strategy where you're constantly wiping the board. And I would say it almost scales up in saltiness in that way too, because for me personally, I mean, I'm generally okay with mill strategies because those are cards like you said earlier, hey, that could be one of any of the 99 cards in my deck. I can't control if that's the top card, the bottom card, the 50th card,
Sure.
whatever.
It hurts when it happens, but it's like at the end of the day, as a mature player who has been around the block, like you understand that things like that happen. Newer players are going to be a little bit more upset.
Yeah.
But
So the way I would look at it then is like, on top of my deck, or things that I lose off the top of my deck are things I hoped to get in the game, right? Because I put a card in there hoping to see it at some point. Cards that are in my hand are cards that I have a plan for. They're in my hand. I'm strategizing around what I currently have, and cards on my board are things that I'm currently using. So it's like, which resource would you rather lose? The one you're using, the one you hope to use, or the one you wish that you maybe get at some point, you know?
You know what they say, a bird in the hand is worth two fire bolts off the top of the deck. You know, like at the end of the day, they don't say that. I just came up with that. I quoted that. If anybody tries to say they said that, that's mine. But a bolt in the hand is worth two birds, or a bird in the hand is worth a bolt in the bush. I don't know. There's something there. There's something there.
A Nadu in the hand is worth a lightning bolt and a landfall
It's
deck.
worth a concession from every other player at the table. Truth be told, I kind of lost sight of where I was going with that. Just in the sense of like, people care more directly about like, or anything that directly denies them resources. So if it 100% depends on the cards, I think people are going to be salty babies when they see their favorite pet cards. But like you mentioned, like you put a card in the deck that you want to play with, you're playing with it, man. It's just on the other side of the table. It's on my board. I reanimated your pet card. That's fun. We all yeah, I agree. Ruin Crab is strong. You know, like we get to have that dialogue about cards in your deck. But
you know what's interesting?
Huh?
No, go ahead.
No, you go.
No, what I was gonna say is just to sum up, like kind of wrap up what I was bringing on the deck versus hand versus board, is if you look at three of the common like theft commanders, like historically known theft commanders, you can almost look at them and see that saltiness level kind of scale in comparison. So if we look at like top of deck, right, you got a Tali. A Tali comes out, everybody flips something off the top. It's a luck of the draw. You know, maybe you get something good, maybe you don't. Who knows? Then you brought up Sin Triplets. That's messing with somebody's hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go on the other end of it, you've got Turgrid, which is their board, their hand. You know,
yeah, that's a bit of an extreme case. I would like, maybe for as far as like graveyard goes, I think the Scarab God is a good example of a theft commander that strictly relies on graveyard shenanigans.
Well, I meant Turgrid more in a board, like an on-board presence, an on-board theft kind of thing, because you destroy people's stuff off the board or you force them to discard.
Isn't it sacrifice, not destroy?
Yeah, but it is on their board. So if you put a bunch of edicts out,
I mean, you said destroy. Man said destroy.
Hey, sacrificing is destroying through your own will power.
I think a judge would have something to say about that, but
it's destruction by choice.
Yeah, you're basically, you know, like at that point with something like the Send Triplets, you're kind of using your opponent's hand as an extension of your own, and so it kind of gets to that point of like, well, should I even be should I even be planning about what I'm going to do on my turn? Because when it comes around to you, you're going to take all the best cards in my hand that I'm not able to cast because maybe you took my Soul Ring, you took my Arcane Signet, or something like that, and you've been denied resources. It definitely is going to create a bad feels for everybody involved. Like the person who's stealing doesn't feel good to watch somebody have like kind of a non-game, but the ideal game for those types of decks that are trying to steal from people's hands are like, I stole everything out of everybody's hand and nobody played anything but me. How
You're not wrong, because every deck where I've seen a theft, every game I've seen a theft deck pop off has been like that. Like, oh well, there goes my key piece that I needed. Oh wow, that's fantastic to see them with my big dragon and that person's big spell. Oh, and that third person's ramp, and just it's fun, for them.
Well, I mean, it goes beyond just being fun, because I would also mention that there is like kind of a secret category of thievery that I don't think is very salt inducing, but it does just straight up end games. And that's like cards that allow you to steal everything. Obviously, if you're taking one thing from one person, they're going to feel a little bit of some sort of way. But if you cast like Insurrection, which is a spell that takes control of all the creatures on the battlefield and gives them haste, you're often just building enough of a immediate board presence to convert the game into a win. Or if you have enough, creatures, you got the one, somebody else had a Crater Hoof Behemoth that they I guess that wouldn't really work, but you know what I mean. Like just
Mhm.
assembling that massive board from all your opponent's boards, or like an Dihada, the Binder of Wills has a very similar effect. It's just going to end the game, and whatever doesn't get ended disappears. Or like if say you only kill one person, the creatures that you've stolen from them fade away. They return to that person's deck so that they can pack up and call their mom to pick them up from the local game store.
Modern Horizons 3 just gave us a good example with a little Eldrazi that likes to drop in and take pretty much the best board or best army that one player has,
Very
and
true.
then wipes it on your way out the door.
Very true. And that's a really good a good card, because it emphasizes that point that as soon as the player who controls those creatures is dead, all those creatures cease to exist. They get exiled, they get sacrificed, or whatever. You don't get like death triggers off of them, but they return to the opponent's deck. There's actually a decent amount of thievery in MH3. There's also the new Gilded Stormdrake that does kind of a similar thing, but for a single target. But I do think Emrakul, the new Emrakul, is pretty Emrakul.
Smooth joke there. So I have, I want to say one theft deck, Lost Caverns of Ixalan, a pirate deck that has sort of a theft sub theme.
Yeah, Admiral Beckett Brass, or the new, Beckett Brass.
Yeah, the new one. What I like about that deck in particular, and some of the things they've done since then, is they seem to be doing a better job about making theft decks like thematic. Because when you look at older stuff like Atali, why does Atali steal your stuff from a lore reason? Just cause he's red and they want to give it a cool effect.
The primal storm. The storms are chaotic. You're storming by casting 4 things for free. Primal conqueror. Conquering is chaotic.
What's Sin triplets? They're psychics, so they can see your hand.
Like obviously the primal storm, Atali, that's like, it's chaos. It's creating a storm of energy. The Sin triplets, they're sinning, and they're triplets, and the primal sin of Magic the Gathering is land destruction or stealing stuff from your opponent's hand. So I think it's canonical.
But they pale in comparison to now, where it's pirates and outlaws. The last deck was the Gonti outlaw deck, and he looked sneaky and outlaw-ish.
Yeah,
he's outside the law, so he's stealing things.
I think that's what
fair.
I'm getting at. Well, okay, that's interesting, because like outlaws and pirates, obviously 2 groups of people that commit crimes, and yet committing crimes stealing is a crime. Like the way you not only in real life, but targeting an opponent's permanent to steal it is a crime. And so I think that's a good lore tie-in from Wizards of the Coast. I'm happy that they're creating more criminal subtypes.
I mean, we'll have to see what they do with outlaws, right? Because we just had the one set, and who knows if we revisit anything in that kind of similar setting. But pirates have been around for several sets now, and they keep getting support. But I think they've done a good job kind of fleshing out what pirates are at this point, which are make treasure, attack, because they have a lot of like multiple combat cards.
Don't forget about
steal stuff.
Monkey. There's a lot of monkeys.
Yeah, Monkey is a pirate. My favorite pirate, in fact.
So there's one. I think that's a fantastic point, that like pirates being really cemented into that identity kind of gives like theft a fun package, because you used to have to, even like the Sin triplets, that card requires you to cast spells using mana of your own colors, or like you don't get the mana fixing that a lot of like theft provides. You're automatically stealing these creatures. You don't really care about their casting cost, but when you're taking something from somebody's hand, you with the Sin triplets, which is admittedly a much older card from like Alara, you don't get that convenience. And so they're kind of making it so pirates, you could play a pirate deck straight up just pirates, but you can also kind of take it in that other direction of being like, okay, I'm gonna play, what's that dude who you get treasures when you steal
Don Andreas.
Don Andreas, the renegade, where you can take it in pretty much whichever direction you want.
And it is the same thing, right? It's treasure, it's theft. I do like the fact that they were pretty cemented in Grixis as well, because those seem to be like the criminal colors. If you were gonna if you're going to target one to be like, this is the shard for criminals, that's probably it. The Nicol Bolas shard.
Yeah, Nicol Bolas, surprisingly not a criminal. They should give him a subtype of one of the worst, FBI's most, or WOTC's most wanted. I guess they already have Ravnica's most wanted. Like Krenko, he's on that list.
Now, you know what you never see in a theft deck? Wait, let me take that back, because I believe it was in, because Sin Triplets is Esper, right?
Yeah.
Blue, white, black. Yeah. I was going to say white, but I'd take it back. There was white in.
Yeah.
I think they're steering clear away from that now.
Yeah, so you kind of see, like, I mean, I would actually say there's really the least amount of theft is probably in green. You get, I'm not really, I don't think any way to, and straight up just green, there's very few like direct theft spells. Obviously the new Atali is red and green, and that has a good deal of thievery, but green
yeah,
being,
but I think that I think on those, because you've got the new Atali, right, the Primal Sickness, and you've got the new Gonti, which is in green as well. Yeah, but I would argue that green is sort of like a ancillary color on those. That's really a Dimir commander that has green splashed on it, and the Atali is really a red commander that has green splashed on it on the back.
Right. Oh, that's a great point. And so I think I would argue that green has, because even like white has a lot of those cards that, O-ring style effects, exile something underneath this enchantment or underneath this creature. That's almost like theft, because you are temporarily removing something, from the board. And so that I don't know. That's my humble opinion. That's my theory, game theory.
He retired, you know that?
Yes, I do.
Like a month or two ago. That's so sad. Miss him. Come back, Matt Pat. I would say, though, those white effects you're talking about are almost more like detainment effects or containment, whichever. Really, both words work,
and
but they're really
is
more
stealing, but containing something on my board or in my pocket, or
so
in my stomach.
By your argument, like imprisonment is stealing. I'm stealing your freedom. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, no, okay. That's actually you. I was gonna say no, but you turned me around on that. I do agree with that. Imprisonment is stealing your freedom, undeniably so. So I do stand by that.
I like how you're like, I'm gonna veer away, but also agree with you, but also veer away.
Now, there is one form of stealing that can accidentally occur when you're playing a theft deck, and this is one thing that I got to mention before we get too far away. Is just, if you have the same color sleeves, you got to be really careful when playing a theft deck. It's it's easy when you're playing all jet black dragon shields and somebody has like pink or the art cards. It's very easy to tell when you have different cards, but especially if you're playing against somebody in the same colors, you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was your Viscera Seer. So you have to be really mindful. And also, a lot of people are not initially comfortable with you reaching over and grabbing their cards. So, you kind of have to come about it from a standpoint of, hey, would you mind, or like, can I touch that? Can I take that and put that on my board? Or I'll have a separate pile to differentiate, which cards I do not own, but I control, and which cards, you do own and control, because otherwise it can get a little bit confusing. And, as somebody who plays with real paper Magic rather than like proxies, it's like you're like, oh, that might be an expensive card that you've taken, and it kind of adds like an element of stress to the game.
Because when we talk about things you should and shouldn't do, especially, and we've talked about this before when we've talked about events, is showing up and just kind of like talon scooping up someone's card is a huge red flag. If I don't know you, and sometimes, I mean, even if I do know you, it's still, hey, can I see that for a second? Not swipe, let me look at it.
Yeah, you got to be on top of your etiquette if you're playing a deck like this. It's vitally important. You can also use like infinite tokens or something to that effect and kind of like represent them if you're even worried about that happening. Like, I think everybody, if you've been playing for long enough, or if you were playing when you were young, like it happens. And if you're playing with your friends, you can always just return the card. But it sucks to be like, you counting your deck and you're like, oh, I only have 99 or I only have 98 cards. I'm missing something. And then, just kind of thinking back on all the games you've played where somebody took your lands, like if they're playing that, the Smeagol helpful guide, and it's like, it can be very difficult to remember what card specifically is gone. So that's a frustrating part of theft that does not have to be if you're either really on top of it or if you are, like I said, representing those cards with infinite tokens or marking them with dice or some other, anything to just differentiate them.
And this is going to be like a pseudo related point, but I think it's something that we could talk about as well. When you look at like theft decks and clarity from a board state kind of standpoint, with more and more people playing on spell table as well, sometimes you have to kind of pick time and place as far as when you're playing those decks, because I have sat through exactly one spell table game, and I've not done it since, thankfully, not due to refusal, but just like I've dodged this bullet. But I sat down at one where two people were playing theft decks and trying to keep track of that board state on a webcam of, okay, this is sitting on my mat, but it's not actually on my board state. I'm just leaving it here in the upper left corner as a reference so the other person knows what they stole. Oh, wait, this person stole my thing off of their board, so it's still on my mat, but it's not that second person's item anymore. Now it's the third person's item. Ugh.
It's definitely there is room to be improved there. If you're a software developer, like, you should figure out some way to work with spell table to come up with a solution to this, because it's like you said, it's really difficult. And even if you're playing like a reanimator deck that doesn't necessarily care 100% about thievery, but you might, if possible, you kind of have to be like either vigilant about saying, hey, just let me know the cards that you're milling into your graveyard, so I can write them down and kind of keep a running storage of that, because you're not able to look through somebody's graveyard. In person, you can say, hey, Cory, can I look through your graveyard? I want to see what's in there, which does imply that you might have a way to reanimate something, but you just do not get that on spell table unless you are paying attention as things are coming out. You're paying attention to what's dying, paying attention to what's going in the grave. And like you said, representing other people's cards with infinite tokens, although is a theoretical solution. It's like when you're playing on spell table and nobody can, click on those cards. Sometimes they're hard to read. Your handwriting's awful. It gets difficult to discern what is a threat to me. Can I attack into that board state? Oh, I didn't realize that piece of paper, that ketchup packet that you sharpied a 3/3 onto, was actually a death touch something.
Well, and you lose like a bit of a strategic advantage too, because imagine the difference of like when you hit me and milled me, you saw me put that card in the graveyard and you can reference it at any given point because you can see it, as opposed to constantly asking somebody, well, what'd you put in there? What'd you put in there? Because the only reason you're going to ask me that is if you have some reason to want to need that information. It's sort of like the age old, like, hey, how many cards does everyone have in hand? Or
are you windfalling?
Do you have?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I would take this moment to shill out for Tabletop Simulator, which is a really great way to play Magic online.
You're going to shill out for Windfall. I'd like to really shout out Windfall, Wheel of Fortune.
Those are great cards, but with Tabletop Simulator, all of your cards are on the table at all times. Anybody can pick or search a pile without anyone knowing. So on your turn, I can be looking through your graveyard without you having any idea, because we're chatting and laughing on the Discord. Which definitely, I think it gives you back that strategic advantage that you lose through like traditionally playing like a graveyard based theft deck, but it's otherwise just a really great program and worth checking out.
Not a sponsor.
I did want to mention also in reference to something like Wheel of Fortune or Windfall, that new card, that new red energy card that wheels.
Oh, the A thing.
Yeah. So there's this whole, if you haven't heard about hold on.
I know. So While you're looking it up, so just to summarize it for everybody, so it's a red card. When you play it, you get, I believe, 3 energy, and then you may pay. It says you may pay X and an energy. Then it says draw X amount of cards. The where the hookup is on the semantics of the may. So because it says you may play or you may pay X in energy,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that just go, well, I'm declaring 50, 60, 70 cards, but it says I may pay, so I choose not to pay.
And then
And
the
I'm going to
second
draw the
half, yeah,
70 card.
your X has already been declared, so you're able to then provide that 50 for everyone. The card is
So I
called Wheel of
really,
Potential, by the way.
now, I really don't like that argument. I got to be honest with you, because the intent of what that card does is so obvious. It's pay this, and if but what it should say is, gain 3 energy, then you may pay blank,
Each
like X
player
in energy,
may
and
draw
then
cards equal to paid energy or something like that, or
yeah,
like the energy
or should
paid.
say, you may pay this. If you do blah blah blah.
Yeah, and so
You
that's like
know?
a severe, like, how did that slip through the cracks and not get picked up? Because it's actually, there are a couple cards in this set that have a similar wording that function like theoretically similarly. But I have seen the Twitter discourse regarding this card. I saw a judge who mentioned that they would rule the way that this card is clearly intended to mean, because otherwise
Yeah.
there's going to be a serious need for some errata. And honestly, they should just go ahead and errata it on the next CAG meeting or whatever.
Yes, just like errata it, just so you don't have that one person that's trying to pull off some shenanigan. Because the next thing that's going to happen is there's going to be somebody at like a CEDH tournament that has some prizes or money or something on the line, and they're going to try and pull this off, and there's going to be some big feels bad about what the judge ruled, whether it's, oh, the judge ruled in their favor and the rest of the pod got PO'd, or vice versa.
Right.
So I think the intent of the card is so obvious that I understand why it slipped through the cracks, because it's one of those things you write down, and because you're so focused on it in a development standpoint, you're like, there's no other way to interpret this card. But because someone's arguing semantics on the may,
Well,
now there's this whole issue.
they're a small indie company, and so they can't afford quality
Yeah,
assurance or quality control.
yeah, this world's smallest tester department.
With their smallest, tiniest violins.
Circling back to theft, though, this is where I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit. This is where theft decks might struggle, is when it comes to closing out the game, because you don't necessarily have the same win con to rely on every game. Like we talked about this at the top of the conversation, right? Is you're trading off consistency for sort of the chaos of it all.
Yeah. And so, like, if you don't have a reliable win condition, you're going to find that, like we mentioned earlier, as you're killing off players, the things that you stole from them are disappearing. Your board is getting smaller. Your opponent's board, by comparison, is at least looking bigger. And so you kind of need to have like a surefire victory, whether that's like something like I mentioned earlier, the mass steal effects that are able to take everybody out in one big blow, or you're maybe reliant on not winning. You just want to have a fun time and cause a little bit of chaos, which is valid too. My deck that I referenced as my theft deck, which is Scarab God, which more often than not, I don't really end up stealing things unless there's an interesting or a more optimal play. I have enough creatures in my deck to function that the Thievery acts as a little bit of a secondary, win con. Like, say you mill a Gray Merchant of Asphodel. Well, now I will, my Thievery meter is ding 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 going off because Gray Merchant of Asphodel is a great card. I have one in my deck that's going to gain me a lot of life. It's going to deal a lot of damage to you. And so I have, guarantee, I have other ways to go to the win, but still allow me to, thieve, because otherwise just stealing isn't by itself a win con. It can be in the right circumstances, but if your opponents have big boards, if you're just stealing creatures and you're throwing them into walls of blockers, you're going to find out that that doesn't last forever.
Like if you're playing on a consistent winning strategy, right? You either have to have theft, I feel, as a way to add fodder to an engine you have, or you're using it as a secondary backup as almost like pseudo removal. Like, oh, I'm removing your threats because they're all on my side now. Or when I say like fodder for an engine, let's just say you were running some kind of death triggers deck or some sacrifice deck, something where you get a payoff for that.
Right.
So it might benefit you to go, oh, I stole your biggest creature and then I sacked it to whatever Ashnod's altar or what, whatever your card is to get your payoffs.
Right. Well, and like for instance, well that's a really good point, and that theft goes really well with having those like instant speed sack outlets, or something that wants you to sacrifice a creature. Like there's a lot of red cards that you sack a creature and then exile up the top of your library until you find another creature, and you're much more incentivized to do that to somebody else's creature that you control, because then you're also not only are you getting the value, but you're removing something from your opponent's board and kind of like doubling up on that that resource advantage. It's also worth noting that things you steal from other people, if the card doesn't inherently say that it takes control and gives that creature haste, you're going to find more often than not, like a lot of those red sorcery speed cards do that. They take control and they say it gains haste until end of turn. Because if you don't control a creature at the beginning of the turn, that creature is affected by summoning sickness. So there are a lot of thievery spells that look really cool, but in reality don't give that kind of that haste that you want or maybe are used to because you've played and you've gotten active treasoned before, and it kind of just feels like it's part of that evergreen keyword of like taking control of something and giving it haste. Like you don't really think about the haste because it's so ubiquitous, but you do actually have to pay close attention to that, because there are a lot of cards that do steal a creature and don't give it haste. So I've seen people not be familiar with that rule and get advantage out of cards that they shouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I want to say the ones that usually you see that give haste are the ones that you gain control of a creature till end of turn,
Right.
or usually a lot of the red, like you were saying, the red cards do. The stuff that's going to give you control of that creature long term, it's kind of a mixed bag. A lot of the older stuff does not actually give it haste. I feel like it's more of the newer, is maybe a nod to power creep a little bit, or that's how they're kind of fueling the power creep. Is okay, now you get it and it gets haste.
Well, yeah, and I admittedly also I think that's a color pie thing. Like a lot of the blue cards that take control of something aren't giving them haste, but that's because you're kind of breaking the color pie just a little bit with that. And so red, I think they wanted to kind of funnel like blatantly stealing. Oh, that's funny because blatant thievery is a blue card, but
Blatantly stealing is no card.
And then versus obviously black getting kind of access to that graveyard theft, which isn't technically theft, but more recycling.
Mass Reanimator, yeah. Where would you, if you had to build a deck today, you had to build a deck today out of theft, I mean, where would you lean towards? Like as far as colors, or is there a particular commander, or is there a play style you would enjoy?
Well, I mean, if we do this from the perspective that like I haven't been whining about how good my Scarab God deck is for the last 30 some odd episodes. I really like that effect. I feel like I get the chance to play with other people's things when I'm in a Reanimator matchup. I like being in that standoff and showing that I can reanimate at instant speed and steal. But it's the security of having my own built-in win cons and combos that I don't have to rely on other people's stuff that makes theft fun for me, because it's like it's victimless crime, if you will. Not really, but you know what I mean. Like it's less stakes. Like if you're playing a Don and Drace deck that entirely cares about stealing, you're gonna have those games where you just don't get anything good off of anybody, or like the best thing you steal is a Sakura Tribe Elder, and those games kind of turn into non-games for you. And so my ideal theft deck has backup plans. It's using theft as a maybe like a means to an end, or a means of stalling until you can kind of assemble, like, or a means of stalling slash disruption until you can assemble your win con. And then the things that you've stolen maybe don't matter as much as they did to your opponents. I think that, taking people's commanders, that's something that they do not like, because it is difficult to get a commander back once it's stolen from you, unless you're able to remove it. But that's another kind of effective way to utilize theft, because a lot of times people build decks that care, so their commanders are linchpins where they need them to be able to function. And so if you're able to take control and kind of get into a point where, like, oh well, I guess nobody else wants the Turgid player to have Turgid back, so you can keep her.
I feel like I'm kind of in the same boat. Now, I don't mind so much the randomness of kind of running in a Tali, or running like a, let me see what you have on the top of your deck and let random, like let fate kind of decide where we go with this. Almost because from a political gaming standpoint, your hands are a little cleaner, right? Like, oh, was that your win con we just flipped off the top of your deck? Well, I mean, I couldn't control that. That's just, how did I know you had Blightsteel Colossus directly on top? Weird,
Even though you worldly tutored it to the top last turn.
Exactly. It's almost like it's like the Yuriko Erie, right? Of like, oh, I couldn't control what was on the top of my deck, but I actually built my whole deck to control what was on the top of my deck.
Yeah, if well, okay, and if you're able to, like, somebody mills something, or somebody searches something at the top, and you're able to mill it off and steal it, that's such a good feeling, and that's like kind of your successful play for the day.
So,
Like, remember when
wait.
you put Dockside Extortionist on the top, and I milled it, and then I reanimated it, and you didn't get the Dockside Extortionist, but you knew I had a reanimator on the board? Like, oh, that is just such a good feeling. You don't even have to win that game.
I like how you describe this as it's such a good feeling. Yeah, for you. For the other person, they're like, yo, thanks for rubbing salt in that wound.
You
Thanks
make them a better
bud.
player. They won't do that again.
You make that, I'm sorry, did you say a better player or a bitter player? Because I think it's really either or.
A better player, but a bitter blossom.
But I think that brings us to the end of the conversation. So let's hop into question of the week, card of the week. Just a little bit shorter of an episode, but I think we got some of the juice out.
Yeah.
All right, Cole, you ready? Because we got a little salty question for you today.
Let's hear it.
Question of the week this week comes from Andy over on Apple Podcasts. And Andy would like to know, is there a commander you won't play against that is somewhat unconventional? And then he follows that with, i.e., not Toxrill, Turgid, Coma, etc. So is there a commander you refuse to play against that's not like a obvious commander, I guess?
Well, I mean, there's a new obvious commander that I think people are not wanting to play against, and we mentioned it earlier briefly, but Nadu. Oh, and also thank you, Andy, so much for asking the question and interacting with us. We're super grateful for your interactions. Nadu, the bird, the winged wisdom, who gets just insane amounts of advantage off the top, but I would say that almost falls into that category that Andy was talking about, that it is a pretty conventional commander. I think that people have jumped onto very quickly after it did so well in like the CEDH top 4, and the fact that it's a non-deterministic combo that can take 20-minute turns. I mean, that's kind of it for me. Is like, I don't, other than I have no commanders that I would just downright refuse to play against. But I obviously wouldn't want to play into like a horrible matchup. Like, Erica, my fiance, runs a awesome Rurikthar deck, but I know that if I pick my creatureless deck that only has or sorceries, enchantments, and instants, I'm not going to be putting myself in for a good game. Like, I'm like, you directly counter me. So I just I don't like playing into direct counter decks, but I'm pretty open. I like seeing what people are doing, with commanders. I'm generally pretty open to the, oh, it's not that kind of deck, conversation and giving it a shot, only to find out that it was in fact that kind of deck. Yeah. What about you, Corey?
I'm kind of in the same boat. There's no commander that I think I've ever gone, ugh, I'll never play, or I refuse to play, or I'm gonna get up and walk away from the table. Even, I mean, we've got a friend that plays Toxrill pretty consistently in like our friend group online and stuff. And, am I going to sit there and play like 5 games in a row against it? No, but he's also not bringing out Toxrill 5 games in a row. But I'll sit through a game of it, sure. Like if I see a Rorik Thar coming out, I'm not bringing out my Spellslinger deck. I would like some discussion ahead of time where we're all on the same page about what we're playing, because I have seen games like that where it's someone brings out their spell slinger deck and then one person's like, well, I've got the perfect strategy to shut it down, or I've got my artifact deck, and the other person's like, well, guess what, I play all oofs and good luck.
Well, I want to mention as well. There's kind of a power level conversation there too. Like I didn't really talk about it, but this week in Magic, I actually checked out an LGS that we've moved near that we haven't had a chance to go to, and it was brimming with people, and we got to play a couple of good Commander games. But one of the first game that we played with this group of two dudes is Erica and me, and he plays like a Chatterfang combo deck that is just about finding, a way to make or essentially just Zulaport Cutthroat, Blood Artist, like with infinite tokens as quickly as possible. And it was our first game, playing with these people, and so we kind of, without really having a super detailed conversation about it, like not really a rule zero discussion, which is maybe our fault, but we kind of set up for a slower, more casual game, and the game was over on turn 3.5. And so that was a point where I'm like, well, this is clearly a bad matchup of power, and that's not something that I like. He's like, oh well, you should have destroyed this, and it's like, you're right, we should have destroyed that, but at a certain point you can only do so much.
That's also, I don't think that's necessarily the best sportsmanship either. I mean, depending on the tone, I wasn't sitting there, but depending on the tone, this may not the best sportsmanship to go, well, I guess you should have assessed the threats better. Haha.
Yeah, it's like, oh well, you played 2 of your 3 combo pieces on on turn 3, so that really I invested my I only have 2 lands, I'm going after you, it's your turn 3, it's my turn 2, or that sort of thing. Like I don't like, and I think there are a lot of like CEDH commanders that are just difficult to power down that I'm kind of like hesitant to play against. And like the primary example, like you mentioned, Yuriko is like, that's just a deck that is going to be very strong no matter, how you build it. Or like Najeela, the Blade Blossom. I don't know how many times I've played against a Najeela deck that's like, oh, it's not like that. And then it's like, okay, you make infinite combats and win, very quickly. Like, awesome. Najeela, really strong card. Or even
no, I mean, I'll use myself as an example, right? Like I have a Miram deck that I would say is not the strongest Miram deck in existence. Like it's not the most combo-y Miram deck in existence, but because it's Miram, I've had games where it's like, well, turn 5, turn 6, oh, I just happened to win because it just became such an overwhelming board presence.
And that happens, that happens. But as long as you're judging appropriately and like looking to have fair games and kind of like looking around at the table and being like, oh, okay, that person's playing a precon. This person said it's their second game of Magic ever. This, the third person is like a experienced player like myself. Like you kind of feel it out and play something appropriate to the table. And if you don't, it's kind of like, oh, you were looking to get that turn 4 to 5 win against these people who weren't really prepared to do the same thing. So however you have your fun, but at a certain point you're going to get, if you're in my play group, we're going to have a conversation about it.
This is something that is obviously going to be sort of like a first worldy boo-hoo kind of problem when I bring this up. And I don't think this applies to the game you're speaking of directly, because you just went into an LGS and kind of like ran into, couple people that were there.
Very nice people, I should add. Very nice.
Oh yeah. No. I'm not saying this to disparage anybody, but what I mean is like you just kind of luck of the draw ran into a couple people that were strangers more or less. Like you didn't know them, they didn't know you, from anybody, right?
Right.
But I've run into this situation too, especially playing games online, is when you come across people who are generally aware of like, hey, you're some kind of magic content creator to some degree, it's almost like that rule zero conversation goes out the window because they go, yeah, this is a fair deck, and they just play some like weird higher power than what you're playing because they're like, oh well, you should be able to handle it because you make a podcast, so therefore you must be like some kind of uber pro tour, genius who can make a jank deck destroy my CEDH optimized deck.
I love when I get on the bus and somebody's like, "Oh, you make a podcast? You must be please take my seat," or
Oh yeah, all the time. Especially when you're walking through the grocery store and the little grandmas are like, "Oh my goodness, there he is."
And they're like, "Can you
My
reach that
grandson
box
listens
of
to you."
cereal for me? Oh, those arms, they look like a podcaster's arms." Like, which means that
No, like I
they're
said,
awesome and muscular, not that they are
yeah.
a
You can
podcaster's arm in the other direction.
Yeah, no, like I said, it's just like a little bit of a first world problem. But I always just think it's funny that and I've had this experience like a couple of times where people will hop on and they play with me and they'll go like they'll play some deck where they're like, "Oh, I'm playing a precon," and they go, "Well, I'm playing Kinnan Bonder Prodigy," and you're like, What are we doing here? What's happening here exactly?" Like I yes, I make a podcast. I'm not Seto Kaiba, like just you know.
So, Andy, it seems like we don't have a great answer for you as far as specific unconventional cards, um, but we do agree that it's a matter of like if it's not a fun matchup, I don't want to. I'm not playing against it. But otherwise, it looks too cowardly to be like, I won't play against that commander. I guess I'll sit this game out. Like I'd rather just we all play it and get the chance to sling some
Yeah.
spells.
Like, and if you take your lumps because you're like, oh, this commander's just too OP for the table, it is what it is. It's better. It is better than just kind of sitting there staring at three other people playing Magic.
It's better to have gamed and lost than to have never gamed at all.
Oh, that's beautiful. Did you write that yourself?
Technically, yes, but it is inspired slash plagiarized. The rest of it.
Mm, we don't talk about that. But hey, thank you again for your question of the week. If you guys want to leave us question of the weeks, you can pretty much comment anywhere you see this podcast. So Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, all that good stuff. Reach out to us on Twitter, anything like that. We always love answering questions, and we do get a good amount of like diverse ones, which I really enjoy. You would think for a Magic, I'm going to praise you guys for a second. You'd think for a Magic the Gathering podcast, we'd get a lot of the same stuff. That's like, what's your favorite card? What is your favorite commander? We do get like different out of the box questions, I think, which is appreciated.
Absolutely. So once again, thank you, Andy. We appreciate your interaction.
Cole, what do we got for card of the week this week?
Yeah, so I know we've been talking about stealing. The card of the week this week is going to be about sharing, and that's a theft card that I really like. It's horrible in online gameplay, but very fun in real life gameplay, and it's Share the Spoils. That's one in a red for an enchantment that says whenever Share the Spoils enters the battlefield or an opponent loses the game, exile the top card of each player's library. During each player's turn, that player may play a land or cast a spell from among cards exiled with Share the Spoils, and they may spend mana as though or any mana to cast that spell. When they do so, exile the top card of that player's library. So when you play this card, it's like a small Atali in the sense that everybody exiles the top, but it all goes into the middle and everybody gets the chance to play it for the rest of the game. You can only play one thing per turn and you replace what you've played off the top of your deck. But I think that this is such a fun card because it kind of allows everybody to benefit from theft. And if you're having a behind game, usually more often than not, there's a land available for you to play. If you're playing ahead, you might be like, I really want that soul ring, and you play the soul ring, and then the card you need gets exiled into the storm, and the next person gets to cast it, and you've just ruined your entire game. It's a very feast or famine card in that sense of it. But it always provides for very fun interactions of like choices, and everybody gets to get involved in your fun thievery.
All right, you're gonna sit back now, and you're gonna hear Corey's hot take because I think you were stalking my Twitter timeline because just last week, someone or the week before, someone was asking about play styles or cards that you do not like, and I said share the spoils.
Interesting.
And I'm gonna tell you why, Cole. Sit back and let Grandpappy Corey wax you a yarn. I don't like share the spoils. I don't like share the spoils in decks that involve Gandalf. People that play Gandalf and share the spoils are the worst people. And I refuse that. Actually, that's my question of the week answer. I hate Gandalf.
And I have to assume you're discussing Gandalf the Grey. My Gandalf?
Yeah, but only one has share the spoils. No, okay, so I do not like share the spoils, not because of the theft aspect. I'm actually really okay with theft decks. Like, you all want to play theft decks in person because, again, I don't want to deal with the spell table aspect. Whatever, steal from the top of my deck. It is what it is.
Right.
I don't care. The reason I don't like share the spoils is because I think it leads to decision paralysis amongst a lot of players, and a lot of players forget that it exists mid game. So when the card comes out, everybody exiles off the top, and then it kind of sits there. And then the owner of the card remembers of its existence, and maybe one other person remembers of its existence if they see a card that they're like, oh, wow, this is really going to be a banger for my strategy. But otherwise, it's like a separate hand that people forget about. And then when they get reminded about it, they're like, oh, wait, now I got to factor in 4 other cards I wasn't looking at. It slows down their turn.
Well,
So
you just need a better play group.
Streamline. What? Yeah, but I only see the card in our play group. So what does that say about you, Cole? As the older person that plays it.
I do agree with you. People often forget about it, and you'll be like, oh, I'm going to play this thing that it seemed like you really desperately needed but neglected to play. And that always makes for fun interactions too, because then they go, oh, I should have cast that. I can't believe I forgot about the share the spoils. I find that if something seems beneficial, or like or like somebody is missing land drops, you can kind of egg them on and be like, if you don't have a land for turn, you should, play something out of the spoils. And then they play some weird off-color land for their deck and flip the best card in their deck into the pile, and then you get to take it. That's always a good feeling. But even when that doesn't happen, it's like it's a card that helps like basically is card selection for everybody at the table. So when you're playing with experienced players, or if everybody kind of knows the contents of everybody else's deck, like if you're playing with a play group that you've played with for years, it's a very, very, very fun card because you know how every card interacts with the kind of the micro ecosystem of somebody's deck.
Yeah, so I agree with the fact that it's sort of like pseudo impulse draw for every single deck, or it's like a mini Atali. Like I said, my biggest gripe about the card is people tend to get decision paralysis around it, especially if they're playing 3 decks they're not familiar with. They're going to sit there and look at it and go, I got to read these 3 cards, figure out what they do. Does this card combo with anything on my board? No. Let me look at the next card. Does that do anything for me? No.
There you go.
Like, it's just,
there you go. And then
it's tedious.
It's not that tedious. It's not that tedious because everything, it only changes one card at a time. And you might find, if you're the only person playing out of the share the spoils, that eventually the whole pot is your own cards. And so, like, if you assess when the share the spoils is played, what can be useful to you, often you're restricted by mana. It's a low cost card. Usually it's coming out, pretty early in the game. It's not as decision paralysis, but I definitely can see your perspective on that. But I am vetoing it and continuing to hold it at the card of the week status, even though it was on your Twitter most hated death list.
Which, admit it, you didn't see.
I gotta be honest with you, I did not see that particular tweet, but I
It was my number one tweet
I
of
think
all
it's just
time. How
it
did you
speaks
miss
to our mental connection and how our play styles differ from one common ancestor being share the spoils.
So you know what's funny is this topic for this episode I actually had planned prior to seeing that thread where someone was asking about it. So I was like, oh, let's do a theft episode. So then I put out that thing, you know, somebody
Uh-huh.
later was asking about cards we didn't like, and I was like, oh yeah, share the spoils for those following reasons. And here it is. It's full circle now. Now we're having the theft episode. I'm hearing about share the spoils. Share the spoils. If I had to give it a letter grade, I'd give it 3. TDS.
Wow. Wow.
That was good, wasn't it? That was
Was
real
that in the
good.
tweet?
No, but it was good. I'll leave on that high note. But hey, I think that wraps up today's episode. Thank you for joining us as always. Cole, if the people wanted to follow you, they could follow you at loveandmana.mtg, I believe.
That's right. Loveandmana.mtg or Love and Mana. It's not 100% consistent, but you'll see my smiling face in the profile picture. Just click that one.
There you go. If you want to follow me, you can reach out to me at Sleevecard, Instagram, Threads, if I ever remember Threads exists at any point in time, Twitter, any of those good things, or you can reach out to the podcast directly at UrCastPod or contact.urcast@gmail.com. Any of those three, Cole, myself, or the podcast directly, you can leave question of the weeks. You can leave card of the week suggestions if you'd like as well. Sometimes Cole sees them and then he puts them up just to spite me.
That's all right.
So
Give me some
you can put all those out there.
subconscious, subliminally message me by sending me cards, and they might end up as the card of the week if I'm in a pinch. So
Right now, I'm thinking of the other card I hate, Sauron of Many Colors.
interesting.
If you can explain that as a card of the week, good luck. But hey, thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. Have yourselves a magical Friday, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.